Hey, this is Flo and welcome back to the fifth episode of our 30-day weather app challenge from Code with Chris. In this episode we will start to look into the API that we're going to use and generate a model, which is actually quite easy. So the first thing that I did was I copied over the link from the API website to just call it with my browser. Now I'm scrolling down here a bit so you can't see my API key, which would also be right here. So I have a browser extension that formats this JSON for me, but it's actually not needed. I just copied everything and pasted it in a macOS app called Ducky, which you can download in the App Store for free. Just pasted the complete JSON in here, and what Ducky now does is it generates a Swift model for me. So you can see here it generated this model, even with coding keys, for all of the submodels, a struct for minutely forecast, hourly forecast, with its weather, all the variables, and so on. So it looks pretty cool. Now the only thing, it doesn't know the name of this whole JSON thing. So we can specify this over here in the model name section. And I will just call this weather data for now. Hit enter and we'll update it over here. And then I can copy everything and paste it into Xcode, and I'll see you in Xcode in just a second. Okay, so I've opened Xcode now. I still have the model copied into my clipboard. What I'm going to do now is create a new file, a new Swift file, call this weather data as well, hit create, and then just paste everything from Ducky into here. And I want to change the formatting a bit, so I'm indenting, hitting Control I. Now everything is nicely indented. So this is already codable, so this is very nice. Okay, so now that we have our model here, we can start to work on a service, on an API service to actually fetch this data. For that I will create a new group called services and create a new file called WeatherService. I will also import combine here because we will base it off of combine publishers. So I think I'll just make this a struct WeatherService, give this a static func one call API. No, let's call it get weather data, which returns an any publisher of type weather data and error. Oops. And we're gonna work with the URL session publisher, URL session.data task publisher, actually URL session.shared, I believe it is, yeah, data task publisher for a URL. So what we need now is a URL, so let's construct it. Let me think. Yeah, let URL equal. Okay, now let's construct the URL. Let's go back here to our one call API. We can copy this. Okay, and let's put it in here. So let's see what we need. We need latitude, so something right here. We need longitude, so something right here. This exclude part we don't actually need. And then we need an API key, so something right here. Let's make this a URL from a string. Oops, this needs to be capitalized. And let's unwrap it as well. And let's put the URL in here. And then we can work with the publisher later on. So of course now we need the latitude, longitude, and the API key. So let's grab the latitude. Let's grab the longitude. So we can paste these in here, latitude, longitude. And we will create a static file where we can store our API key. So I'm just going to do this in the services folder. I'll just call this file statics and just make it an enum statics and give it a static let API key equal, and then you just paste in your API key that you got from Openweathermap. I'll do that off screen. Okay, and then we can just say statics.api key here, and now we have, now we have our URL. Okay. So I'll put in the API key and I'll see you in just a second. Okay, so I put in the API key in our statics enumeration, and next up we are going to work on this publisher. So we're going to say try map, and if you want to learn more about this, you can check out my video, and if you want to see a real life example of this, or if I would have to learn this right now, then I would go to this Apple website, where they actually have a great implementation here. And just for the sake of time, I will copy this and paste it in here. Oops. And let's see. No, actually it was good. Like this needs to be back once and just like that. And then we don't need the user here. We obviously want the weather data.self. Then in the end we need to erase to any publisher. Okay, so let me explain. And we obviously also have to return this publisher. So let me explain. We take a URL session, create a publisher for this URL, so it just sends a request to this URL. It gets back some data and a response, and we map this to get rid of the error basically, or any HTTP response errors. So we say status code is 200, which means okay. Otherwise we throw a URL error of bad server response, and then we just return all the data that we had. And lastly, we try to decode the data as our weather data through a JSON decoder. Then we erase this to any publisher. And this is basically our get weather data function completed. Now we can close this weather service, close the weather data.swift, and get back into our city overview. We will create a view model for this now, so we can actually communicate with the API. So let's create a new Swift file, call this city overview model. Let's import combine, let's import SwiftUI. Let's make this a final class city overview model conforming to observable object. Okay, this should have a published var, or let's think about these published variables later actually. So this should have a function load, which would call the weather service, and they get weather data. So what we need here is latitude and longitude. So let's say published var let double. Let's copy this so it's a bit quicker. Published var longitude also of type double. Then we also of course need an initializer with latitude and longitude. Okay, let's say self.let equals let, and self.long equals long, and then we can just pass in let and long here. Okay, then we want to subscribe to this, so let's sync, hit enter. First of all, receive completion, then receive value. Oops. And then in the end we also need to store this in a reference, so let's create a private var cancelables. Let it be of type set any cancelable. Okay, and now we can store this subscription in there like this. Okay, now let's handle first of all the completion. Usually you just switch on the completion because there are just two cases. There's a case failure where you grab an error. For now we will just print the localized description of the error and then return out of this function. And then for the other case, finished, we'll just straight up return. Okay, so this is just a very basic implementation of the receive completion part. Now the receive value part will be a bit more interesting. So I will create a published variable weather data. Add published var weather data. Well, actually, yeah, let's keep it published, and let's make this an optional, because in the end, in the beginning, it will be nil. Now what we can do is assign this to our variable. So let's say self.weatherdata equals weather data, and because we don't want any retained cycles, we need to capture week self here, and then add the optional question mark there. Last thing that we want to do is actually call this load function in our initializer. So let's say load, and then the data will be loaded. Okay, so I think this will be it for this episode. In the next one, we will then display the data that we just loaded and show it inside of our app. So if you liked the video, hit the thumbs up button, hit subscribe, and see you in the next one.